the strip mall series was created and starred Julie Brown, who you might remember her on MTV in the late '80s and early '90s. Don't confuse her with Downtown Julie Brown. That's
Right.
the black British VJ who was on MTV, and they actually had her add Downtown to her names to distinguish the two of them because they both were on MTV. But the redheaded Julie Brown, who was a comic, she had a series on MTV called Just Say Julie. That was a sketch comedy show, and I absolutely fell in love with her watching that show on MTV in the late '80s and early '90s. And she wrote a film and co-starred in it called Earth Girls Are Easy with Gina Davis, Jeff Goldblum, and several other stars. And that was a big break for her in the late '80s. She also did a novelty song called "The Homecoming Queen's Got a Gun."
I
And had a
remember
very,
that. Yes, I remember.
very
I love it.
had a really hilarious video that was kind of viral on MTV for a while. But at any rate, I met her on that film that I was telling you about a while ago, Out There, that had Billy Bob Thornton, and I cast her in one of the roles in it and got to meet her, and we became best friends, and we're still best friends to this day. 20 some odd years later, and but when she did a series for Comedy Central called Strip Mall, she called me up and asked me if I wanted to be one of the several directors that would be alternating episodes, and I was just absolutely thrilled to go and do that. And as you said, it also had Cindy Williams, who we all know from Laverne and Shirley, and Stella Stevens, and all kinds of fun people. And it was just a really really fun show to be a part of, and I love doing comedy. It was great working with these great comic actors.
It sounds amazing as well too, and of course, moving on to where you directed some films in Romania as well too. You also directed a rock opera performed by the Romanian rock group Varna Vech, or is it Veci? It's Varnaveche. I don't speak Romanian. It's called "I Will Return a Man," and it was broadcast live on TV from National Theater in Bucharest. And you can tell us about that. That sounds
Yeah,
very fascinating. It's almost like Pink Floyd's The Wall.
it was like Pink Floyd's The Wall, and it was a Romanian rock group called Vama Vechi. That's how you pronounce it.
Varma Vecchi. Okay.
Yeah, and they had a concept album, just like Pink Floyd's The Wall, and they wanted to do it as a kind of do it as a sort of like a stage performance that they put together and did at the Opera House in Bucharest, and the local TV network wanted to televise this live, and then uh, so basically I was over there doing a lot of other film work, and the head of the studio really liked what I was doing and asked me if I might be interested in directing this live performance. I said, "Well, listen, I've never done that before." And he said, "Well, I think you got it in you to do it." So I was like, "I'm up for a challenge. This is great." So we had 10 cameras, and we did one version that went out live, and then the group, everyone stayed, and we did another performance of it. And this time we had cameras, what you call Steadicam cameras, where we would have the cameraman up on the stage, getting close-ups and moving around the stage with the camera and getting a lot of additional coverage and footage, so that there would be the version that went out live, but now we had even more footage, and we kept everything that was shot on all 10 cameras during the live show and everything else. So then I went into an editing room and put together an even more elaborate edit that would then be released on DVD as a much more polished and representation of that live performance. And it was fantastic. I absolutely love doing it. I don't do much of that sort of thing, but it was quite a challenge and really fun to do.
It sounds like a really interesting challenge. And for those that are interested, where can they find the DVD at?
Well, that's tricky. It mainly came out in Romania, and this was quite a while ago in the early 2000s, and so I honestly don't know where you would get it at this point. It's got to be, it may be on YouTube actually, but I Will Return a Man, Vama Veke. You might try that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we'll do that as well too. And of course, besides many projects, in between projects and everything else, you also taught at USC in the School of Film and everything. So, going from actor, producer, director to teacher, and maybe you can tell us about how you got interested in teaching. How did USC contact you?
Well, it actually came about where a friend of mine who's a director was teaching a course there, and he suddenly got a gig to direct a Lifetime movie, and he called me up and asked me if I would replace him as the teacher for that semester. And I was not working at that time, and I thought, well, this would be a very interesting thing to do. So I went and did it and loved it. It was so much fun. And so they asked me back for future semesters, and so whenever I'm between gigs and are able to do it, I try to go and do that. It's great fun.
It does sound like a lot of fun too. And of course, you also wrote a book called Kay Thompson: From Funny Face to Eloise, published by Simon and Schuster. And you also had written about that. And tell us about the book and what inspired you.
Well, this was something else. I nobody really, not too many people know who Kay Thompson is, and I wanted to write a book about her. She wrote the Eloise children's books about the little girl who lives at the Plaza Hotel. They were big bestseller books in the 1950s, and they're still in print to this very day. Um, she also was an actress. She starred in Funny Face with Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire. That was made in the 50s, big budget Paramount musical, and she opens the film with a big number called Think Pink. She plays the fashion magazine editor, and when I was a kid, my older sisters, introduced me to the Eloise books and would read them to me as bedtime stories, and I was in love with that and wanted to move to New York and live in a hotel and have the run of the place just like Eloise. It was just such a great fantasy. And then when I got older, and I actually did move to New York after I got out of college, I discovered the movie Funny Face and saw this woman who was blowing through that movie like a cyclone and basically stealing the movie out from under Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire, which is no small feat. And I just thought, who is this? And I suddenly realized, oh my God, she's the woman who wrote those Eloise books. And I got very interested in her and found out that she worked a lot behind the scenes. She was the head of the vocal department at MGM in the 40s on all the big musicals, and she was the vocal coach and arranger for Frank Sinatra and Judy Garland and Lena Horne. She was very good friends of the Kennedys and directed John F. Kennedy's inaugural gala. She did one of the most influential fashion shows that she directed that introduced some major designers. It's considered the most influential fashion show of the 20th century. She was Liza Minnelli's godmother and lived with Liza Minnelli for 20 years, the last 20 years of her life, and guided Liza in her career. Liza, of course, was the daughter of Judy Garland, who was Kay's best friend. And she just led this really interesting life that was kind of this unsung heroine of the 20th century and was very influential in music and fashion and kind of did it all. So I wrote this book as kind of a hobby between directing gigs, and I would interview people. I ended up interviewing over 200 people, and I just thought, this is so much fun. I'm having a great time doing it. I'll do it as a hobby. If I have to if I have to self-publish and out of my garage, that's fine. I don't care. It is what it is. But when I finally got it done, I got a literary agent, and he said, "Well, let's take it out. We'll start at the top and see what happens." And we took it to three top publishers, and it got into a bidding war. And Simon and Schuster, who's one of the largest publishing companies in the world, ended up taking it and giving it a huge, a big publication. And I went on a big book tour, and it got reviewed everywhere, and won some awards. It was just an incredible experience. At the same time, Liza Minnelli, who Kay had lived with her for so many years, she decided to do a Broadway show recreating Kay Thompson's nightclub act, and which she did at the Palace Theater, and it was called Liza's at the Palace. And I worked on that as a historical consultant, and it ended up winning the Tony Award for Best Theatrical Event that year, and right as my book was coming out. So it all it was just perfect synergy all around, and it was fantastic. And who would have thought that I would have Liza Minnelli sitting in my living room discussing Kay Thompson?
Everything coming together. We love it. It all just works beautiful. And of course, you mentioned about 200 interviews in various topics, also in various magazines, publications, and everything else. Who would you say your most favorite interviews were, and also what was the most memorable interview you've ever done?
Well, the most fun was an interview I did very recently with Cassandra Peterson, who's Elvira, Mistress of the Dark.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just gotten published in a horror magazine called Scream. It's spelled with two E's, SCREEM.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find that online if you go to www.scream.com or just look up Scream magazine. And Elvira's on the cover, and it says Elvira Reveals All, interview by Sam Irvin, and it's Scream magazine number 36. It's the most comprehensive interview she's ever done, and it's a hilarious interview. She's such a funny lady to talk to, and she goes into all kinds of crazy things. She talked about how she loved Superman comics as a kid, and I said, well, isn't that interesting, because our current Superman played by Henry Cavill? And she goes, I do? And I go, you played his mother in Red Riding Hood in 2002? And she goes, I didn't realize that's who that was. So it's really fun things like that happen during the course of the interview. And she tells great stories about how when she was doing the first Elvira movie, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, there were some teenage boys that had to be cast, and she had auditions, and one guy came in, and she thought to herself, this guy is just too cute. He's gonna be cuter than the main guy that I'm supposed to fall in love with. So so she put on her little notes, she put yum yum.
Is that the code word or something?
Yeah. And she ended up not hiring him, and it was Brad Pitt.
Oh, my goodness. Oh,
yeah.
my. Brad Pitt, I have heard those stories where it's like he was in a couple of films. He was in That Cool World. It was like he was just plucked out of the blue. Who would have thought Brad Pitt would have hooked up with Cassandra Peterson in a film? Oh, my goodness.
And many years later, she sold her house to Brad Pitt, and he was over there looking at the house, and she said, well, Brad, I saved your career. And he goes, you did? She said, yes, by not hiring you on Elvira's Haunted Hill.
You should have asked him, is it okay with Jennifer Aniston at the time? You could have asked him that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or Angelina Jolie. So.
Yeah. Then another interview that really stands out, and it goes back to when I was a teenager, 17. It was that trip that I bamboozled my parents to send me to London so I could interview some of my favorite horror stars. And Christopher Lee, I had written to him, and he had agreed